Hi. This is going to be much less scripted than my usual work. It's not that Diablo 4 I don't think isn't worthy of all that effort, but I wanted to try something a little different. For a little bit about me, I wouldn't call myself like a major Diablo fan. I've always been more a fan of like Warcraft as opposed to StarCraft or Diablo, but I've enjoyed them over the years. But when Diablo 4 first launched, God, I think it was like 3-something years ago, I played through the campaign, liked it well enough, but the end game just fucking no. I hated it, and there were a lot of reasons for it. The endgame wasn't finished. There was like nothing to do except for Hell Tides and Nightmare Dungeons, but like there was a lot of quality of life that's in Diablo 4 now that just wasn't. Like, if you wanted to go to a Nightmare Dungeon, you had to travel on foot to said Nightmare Dungeon, and traveling the open world was annoying because, you know, there were skeletons everywhere, they had barricades that blocked your horse or mount or whatever. It just wasn't pleasant to deal with. And the item balance was awful. Like, there was a meme about, like, lucky hit, chance to do extra damage on a Tuesday, which, like, isn't exactly what the problems were, but there was a lot of that, where it was, like, extra damage against demons, extra damage against undead, or conditions that were, like, so hyper-specific they may as well have just been, like, dead text on your items. I ended up leaving Diablo 4 and just never touching it after, like, the first season. I think I checked in randomly for another one that involved vampires, and it was fun, but I still had my problems with it. So I was just like, okay, well, I'll just, D4 is D4, I'll come back one day. And then I skipped Vessel of Hatred, because the new class for that expansion, the Spiritborn, just didn't interest me. I liked the Witch Doctor in Diablo 3, but I wasn't a big fan of the Monk. I've never really been a fan of, like, hand-to-hand combat or monks in general, so it just didn't seem to be enough to pique my interest. And after what I heard about the story not feeling, interstitial, I ended up waiting, and it turned out to be true. Because I did eventually come back after I pre-ordered Lord of Hatred, and I was like, alright, well, let's see. And I did it because pretty much the two classes that were announced for that expansion, the Paladin was cool, but it wasn't my thing. But it was the Warlock that intrigued me the most, because there is this interesting thing when it comes to Diablo as a franchise, in that for its entire history, you just don't truck with demons. You just don't do it. It's not like Warcraft where, like, there are warlocks and demon hunters and death knights where, like, if you want to play with, like, the quote-unquote evil sides of, like, the settings universe, you can, and it's no big deal. Like, you can be a warlock and throw hellfire and whatnot. You can be a death knight, which is a lot of fun, and just throw plagues and diseases. But Diablo was always very certain in that, like, no matter what, you didn't fuck with demonology. You just didn't do it. Hell was too dangerous. They were too corruptive and powerful. And when they pulled the trigger, and they did it in a way that was honestly kind of intriguing, right? And they did it in a very, very multiplicative way, where it wasn't just Diablo 4 that had the Warlock. No, they added it to Diablo Immortal, which I don't have any interest in, because I just don't have an interest in mobile gaming. But it was the fact they added it to Diablo 2 that made me go, alright, what are we doing here? So I ended up coming back for, like, the very tail end of Vessel of Hatred, and the game was improved, but ultimately I was like, I wanted to see how the new skill trees would go. And I was very glad to do it. So I wanted to discuss my thoughts on Lord of Hatred. Everything from, like, mechanics to how it plays to the story in general and where and how it ends and things like that. So again, this is unscripted, so bear with me if I ramble a bit. Let's start with the campaign itself. I think the story for the campaign, while it does feel a little rushed, is really good. It has to go from, like, and to just sort of, like, abridge what happened between the tail end of the base game and Vessel of Hatred. You end up chasing Lilith all across Sanctuary into Hell because she's trying to devour her father's power. You stop her just in time, but Mephisto's still on the cusp of reviving. And you can't really do that, so you end up in this position where it's like, well, we're here. We can't just leave him there, as he's literally sitting there in his giant floating egg ball thing just going, well, what are you going to do? And the choice ends up being that you don't trust yourself because you have Lilith's blood in you, and as we find out in Lord of Hatred, it was probably a bad call, but it was the only call to make. And so Neyrelle decides to use the Soul Stone to trap Mephisto and try to find some way to get rid of him. She naturally fails because this is Diablo. There are no clean wins. And she tries to run off by herself into Nahantu in order to find some way to get rid of him. But she can't, and she's losing. You eventually, with the help of, I don't remember his name, but it's another, like, spirit walker down in Nahantu, you end up finding her, and then you go into, like, the spirit realm, and you come up with this plan of, like, we'll just leave the shard here with Akarat's body, so that, similar to what happened to Tal Rasha, he'll be trapped here, nobody will be able to get to him, he'll basically be banished, and then we can just leave and that'll be it. And then, of course, it doesn't work, because Mephisto hasn't just been fucking around in your head and Neyrelle's head, he's been fucking around in the other guy's head. So, I don't know why, other than just the dude giving into despair. He ends up betraying all of you, grabs Akarat's dead body, and walks off of it with the Soul Stone, resulting in Mephisto possessing Akarat. And for anyone who doesn't know, Akarat is analogous to, like, you know, a messianic figure in Diablo's lore. He's basically Diablo's Jesus Christ. All of the Crusaders and Paladins worship him. He was like the founding of the core faith. There's a lot of stuff in there, but basically, Mephisto ends up possessing this very important historical religious figure, and he starts gathering two sets of followers to Skovos. The first set are the ones who only know him as Akarat, as a savior figure, who is promising salvation from all the demons that are, you know, naturally have been burning and pillaging the whole land for about a year, I think, in-game is how long it takes, I'm not sure. But they've been pillaging away at it, and the other half is the ones who know that he's Mephisto, and they're worshipping him as Mephisto. And so you end up in this thing where it's like you're racing Mephisto as he's gathering more acolytes in Skovos to do something really, really big. And it's interesting how Blizzard set it up, because again, they had to do it really quickly. Because all of these expansions, and Blizzard has done this for a while because they always want to start head on into the action right away, is that they have to set it off really big in order for it to work, because it's like, you get to Skovos, and you're with Lorath, who's, you know, he wasn't there for Vessel of Hatred, he was busy doing other things, but he comes with you because Neyrelle, sadly, was like the first one to get got, the Mephisto. People have such weird reactions to her, and I honestly feel bad. I don't know. I didn't have any problems with Neyrelle, and to me it just makes perfect sense the way it always ends up. Nobody comes out whenever you're dealing with these prime evils sane. It just doesn't work. But Lorath gets there, and he tries to find some way to convince, like, the people there that Akarat is not real, he is Mephisto pulling off a con, and he fucks up. Really fucking badly. Like, the worst possible way you could fuck up. And Mephisto just... I mean, he pulls off a religious miracle, and it literally puts you and Lorath on Skovos' shit list, and you have to work from there to try and find a way in order to stop him. And you do. You end up going on this sort of, like, you know, pick up 3 plot MacGuffins quest in order to find some way to permanently stop Mephisto. And it leads into this interesting little parallel because, of course, Lilith isn't permanently gone. She's been in your blood the whole time, or at least a fragment of her, even though she died all the way back in the base game. But there have been hints of this. Even when I went back to replay Vessel, or when I played Vessel of Hatred, there were plenty of clues. This isn't out of nowhere. Like, she left a trace of herself in you all the way back since the beginning. Like, at the very start of the campaign, when you first get to that village near Kyovashad and end up getting spiked with her blood. And it leads into this interesting sort of, like, parallel between her and Mephisto. This game does something, or Diablo has always done something very interesting about its demons and angels in that they're caricatures, right? They're all very simple-minded. They're more like elementals than they are people. Like, they're not compassionate. The angels aren't either. They're very dogmatic in what they do, and they're almost more like pure elements. Like, to use, like, Invincible's Conquest, they don't really have names, they have purposes. Like, Andariel is like the mistress of torment or misery, Asmodan's the one of sin, Diablo is torment. They all have their own aspects, but like, they don't really have any thoughts other than just killing each other and killing humans by proxy. But the relationship between Mephisto and Lilith is interesting in a way that almost humanizes Mephisto by proxy. So, the TLDR with, like, it goes into, like, the background of Lilith is that Lilith and an angel named Denarius ended up going to Sanctuary because they were both tired of the war, and they created humanity by proxy. They tried to create a world away from the war between the angels and demons. Mephisto eventually found out, thanks to Inarius and tormenting him about it, and ever since then, Sanctuary became, like, a middle stage war between the two powers. And it's always been this weird question when it came to Lilith, was like, she says she cares about humanity, but she turns them into monsters, right? She did it as a way to try and strengthen them against the coming Mephisto's coming and whatnot, but like, it turns them into depraved, murderous, like, horrible monsters, cannibals and all that. So it was always this nebulous question of, like, does she actually care about humanity, or is she just using us as tools? And the answer ends up being yes, but in a way that's like, I'd almost call it in a way that, like, an abusive parent would care for their child, in that, yes, they do, but they expect something out of them that's, like, only through their own mindset. And you can really see it with how she and Mephisto end up, like, seeing each other. They both hate each other, naturally. But it's interesting, because, like, the best way I can put it is that Mephisto is an old businessman who just sees things the way it only will ever be, and he looks at his daughter and sees her painting a canvas and caring about something other than what he cares about, which is just, you know, killing angels, despoiling everything in his wake, and spreading his own influence. And he doesn't understand it. He just can't see it. He sees something that she sees as beautiful and imperfect as just nothing and pathetic and just pointless. And he tries to despoil it out of pure spite. And that's the core of the conflict between them. Is that Lilith does care about humanity in her own way because she made it, and she does see herself in them, but Mephisto can't. All she sees is everything that all Mephisto sees is everything that he hates about his own daughter. And so that's sort of like the core conflict between the two, and it culminates eventually into this really touching moment where, and how much this will actually matter is kind of nebulous, because, like, when it comes to, like, the prime evils, and Lilith is a lesser evil, but even still, like, they always come back. Lilith incentivizes you to take a step to, like, quote-unquote permanently kill her. Whether that'll hold or not is up to interpretation, but I found that very touching, especially the moments where Lilith and you and Lorath are traveling, trying to find basically parts of a weapon in order to permanently banish Mephisto, and you end up going through, I think it's her first son? I don't have it completely straight, because there's like Odyssean and all that in like the Sin War trilogy, but I think Rathma was the first. And you're going through like the ruins of Rathma, and she's seeing like his true thoughts about what he thought of her and how growing up he did love her, but he knew he couldn't trust her. And it's interesting to see how sad it makes her, which you really wouldn't expect out of any demons, but it does affect her. The other interesting thing about the campaign has to do with Lorath, and there isn't really any way to avoid this, but also the return of Tyrael. Tyrael, for anyone who doesn't remember because it's been a while, in order to help humanity in Diablo 3 after the destruction of the World Stone, he ripped off his own wings, metaphorically, because, like, the angel's wings are made of pure light, so it isn't quite exactly like him ripping off his own wings as if he were, fallen, but he ripped off his own divinity, fell back to Earth, and became a human. And it was a cool thing to do for Diablo 3, but it's been years since then, and he's gotten older. He's mortal. And he comes back over here, because he was evidently fighting in the West, but it kept affecting him after a while, and he's been gone for a while, and when Lorath finally sees him, he's like, "Where have you been?" And Tyrael was just like, "I was scared." And it's not hard to see why, because, like, after he gave the Horadrim what they needed, he left. He was like, "Alright, I did what I was meant to do back when he was an angel," and he didn't have, like, I guess mortal sentiment is what I would call it, where, like, you have, like, actual fears and weaknesses, or fears, humanities, and concerns and whatnot, but it was a combination of fear and shame that prevented him from coming over to like Kyovashad and the other area while Lilith was running amok. That and something going on in the West that he alludes to, which it could be Diablo and Diablo 5, who knows. There are some allusions to other things in the side quests that I'm not going to bring up here that could lead to somewhere else, whether that's seasonal content or another expansion, who knows. But it felt very interesting to see not only the, like, irreparable, like, disagreements between Lilith and Mephisto, but at the same time you had, like, the reverse, where Lorath, who is an old soldier who's nearing the end of his life, is, like, able to help Tyrael understand that, like, yeah, no, those things are very human, to feel afraid and unable to, like, keep going and things like that, and to, like, falter in the face of just this unending, like, war against horrible evil. And they're both very similar at this point. Like, in their own ways, they've damned themselves in order to keep fighting this war well past the point of when they should have been able to just stop. Lorath is easily in his 60s, and Tyrael is noticeably older. Like, he speaks with less, like, confidence and zeal than he did in Diablo 3, but it's still there. It's just, like, you can tell the man's coming on in age. And eventually it all culminates against Mephisto, and I mean, this isn't a spoiler. Like, he's on the cover of the box. Of course, you do eventually beat Mephisto. But what I find interesting is that while it is still, and I'm not gonna explain everything about it, it's still a Pyrrhic victory. Like, you still do lose, like, to continue with the painter, like, metaphor, he still poisons the canvas, as it were, but Mephisto is, like, gone, as far as we know. There's, like, hints and leads as to where he could have been sent, but it's not back in hell, so it's probably one of the more permanent victories that, like, Sanctuary has ever gotten against a prime evil. Is it permanent? No, because it's believed he was sent where Lilith came from, and, well, Lilith was able to be pulled from it, but who knows? So, as a campaign, I enjoyed it greatly. But that's thematically, right? Lore-wise. Playing it is kind of an interesting thing. So, Blizzard has this habit when it comes to quest design that I find to be utterly fascinating. And I call it the 3 principles. They've been doing it ever since, like, I want to say Cataclysm, but I became aware of it by the time Legion rolled around, which is like, a lot of the times what you'll do when you go to a new region on a map during a quest campaign is you'll end up doing a trilogy of things. You'll kill 10 of a certain mob, whatever it is. It could just even be generic demons or whatever. You kill 10 things. You kill a named creature, like their leader or whatever, and then you have to click on like 3 to 5 or 8 or like basically you have to interact with 8 objects on the ground. It could be you heal 8 people who are like fighting alongside you. You pick up like 8 gears or something, or like 8 soul crystals, whatever. But that's always what it ends up being, is like this trilogy of activities that you almost always do whenever you campaign or whenever you quest in World of Warcraft. Kill 10 dudes, click on 8 things, kill 1 named dude. Over and over again. Like, it's almost like eerie how much Blizzard reuses that formula. And they kind of do it here in Diablo as well, where like, you'll go to an area and be told, okay, we need to investigate this. So you'll click on like 3 little lore doodads to get like a little summary of what's going on. You'll have to fight your way through a dungeon, which is, I mean, that's ARPGs in general, so that's not that big of a deal. But you'll fight along them. But the other one that comes up, and it's the one that I find interesting, is the hold off this wave of ambushers while I do a thing. Like, it could be they're picking a lock, it could be like they're holding off like a volcanic wave, which is what came up a lot in the later game. It could be like, I need to make this thing, just hold them off for a while. And it's not bad, but the problem is that it happens so often that I've noticed the artifice of it. You know what I mean? And it's not necessarily a terrible or sinful thing, it's just like, it's what ends up happening when you can, like, see the man behind the curtain in a stage show. You just kind of have to go, alright, I get you, you know, and still keep enjoying it. And it's just like, I don't know what the solution to that is, because it's an ARPG. It's not exactly like most campaigns in ARPGs are that complex. 99% of the time, it's just, go here and kill your way to this point, and then kill your way to the next one. But there might be a side quest where you'll just pivot off to a side road to, like, go pick up a thing off a ground, or kill all the enemies in this little side hub area. So it's like, it's better, but I can still see it. And it does help give, like, off the illusion that, like, it gives off the feeling that, like, Lorath and Tyrael are doing something, and you're not just the only one doing all the work, which is, I mean, that's what you are. Let's be real. If you're not there, there's no story. But I do find it interesting, and I don't know the solution about that, but I just find that kind of funny. Other than that, I think of the campaigns, not including, like, because the base game is, like, 5 campaigns, or they're 5 acts split up into, like, a 3-way branch in the middle that you can take in whatever order. It's probably the more interesting one, which, like, it makes sense. It's the end of a trilogy. And the Mephisto boss fight is fucking awesome. The first time you do it, but we'll get to that in a bit. So the campaign's pretty good. And then I guess I'll talk about, like, the header features of it. But first, I want to talk about the Warlock class itself. You're probably seeing it because I'm just running a bunch of, like, B-roll footage in the background as I'm talking about this. I love it. I think it's my favorite class in the game from, like, a design aspect, to where, like, there are a lot of ways you can build one. Maybe they're not all S tier, I don't know. I know the one that I'm playing right now, the Apocalypse build, is probably one of the better ones, but, like, the class is essentially broken up into, like, 4 broad archetypes. There's Hellfire, which is what I'm doing with the Apocalypse build, where you either build up to a really, really big bomb explosion, which is what I'm doing, or you channel a big fire wave, or there's, like, You can transform yourself into a demon and then just try to maintain that for as long as possible and fight in melee. There is the minion build, which is just throwing all sorts of demons at enemies. Like, you can have a demon wall, you can like summon a dude who's like screaming nonstop and he's like all covered in chains and shit, and he's basically like a giant taunt totem. There's and then I think the final archetype is the Abyss build, which is the one that's more interesting, but I ended up pivoting away from it because, like, early game trying to level it was kind of rough, where you use a lot of shadow magic and you use stealth charges in order to, like, boost the Dread Claws, and, like, if I were to ever come back to Warlock, I'd probably play that archetype instead. But there's also, like, the 4 demons you can get. I don't remember all their names. There's Agrom, who's like, they're all generally supposed to be coded for, like, the archetypes. Like, Agrom is the demon summoning one. He's this weird crawling thing that doesn't have legs, that's like, his neck is like split open, so like you command him and he starts spewing out these like baneling little dudes out of his neck and everything. There's the Fire Dog, which I never really did anything with because his activation ability is like, it's the horse charge from Diablo 3 where you mount up and then you move a bit faster, but I have Nether Walk, so I didn't really need another mobility thing, even though he was fire elemental. Then there is the, I don't know its name. It's like a underground ground worm. Like, I looked at it as like the graboid or the tremor worms, where it will just, sort of like a druid's creeper, it will do its own thing, but then you can activate it and all of a sudden a bunch of them will come up and start like jumping up at enemies, and it's really cute, but because it's underground, it can't tank for you. And then there's the one I end up with after a while. I think his name is Volary? I forgot his name, but he's the one who's got, like, his head is in a fucking stockade with one of his arms, and he's just, his whole purpose is basically to, like, be a font of power that you can siphon off of, and you can do a lot of fun things with him. And the one I ended up going with was, all of my spell casts will, like, eat up a portion of my max health, but they all get boosted. They all have volatility, which gives them like additional effects, or it gives them like harder damage, or like for Apocalypse, it causes it to hit twice, which is why it does so much fucking damage. And you can like pop him and you'll like siphon a lot of power and you'll get a bunch of buffs and you'll start like shunting off all of your like personal like life burn onto him for as long as he's alive. It's a really fun archetype. It feels very Destruction Warlock from World of Warcraft, where it's like, oh, I have a demon, but I don't give a shit about their life. I use them as like, they serve me to amplify my own power. And that was really fun. The problem is just the visual mess they create is god awful. I don't know if you're like watching the B-roll footage going on in the background, but like, you just can't see shit. Like, this is like the build at its endpoint to where I have like the flesh carapace that causes like me to throw a bunch of sigils on the ground every time I throw an Apocalypse. My skulls also just leave like a burning trail on the ground, and like the actual Apocalypse explosion, not only does it put like incinerate the ground and cover it in this like black char texture, but there's also like this like red rune on top of it, and it's just non-stop. It becomes like, it's legit. Diablo 4 has this visual language problem that is like a result of them choosing to go in this like more grim, dark, realistic like aesthetic as opposed to like the more cartoony vibe from Diablo 3. And like, people knock Diablo 3 for its visual aesthetic, you know, because it's like, it looks like a lot like Warcraft, but you could see shit, right? And that's like the most important thing. You can't really see shit that well in Diablo 4. And they only made it worse because like, I don't know why they ended up doing it either, but like even lightning is red, like fire effects are red, Crackling Soul, which is where like enemies will just spawn lunatics, which are like banelings that are like blood red on top of you, and then they explode, they're red. The electric pillars are red and they spawn instantly and they start going off immediately. Like, this is a bit of a problem that comes with the idea of using a class that steals the power of the enemies, is that their visual language ends up being the same. It was so bad to the point that, like, I play with a controller. I was relying on my controller's rumble feature in order to tell if I was sitting in shit. It's that bad, and there's just, like, there's nothing you can do about it. And in endgame, it gets to a point where, like, standing in shit is just gonna instantly kill you. And there's not much you can do about it unless you use a certain unique. I think it's called Enduring Faith. I ended up getting one that was of a sigil, which is like this little accessory thing they added, but we'll get to that in a little bit. And it's like, trying to fight in an environment where you can't see anything on the ground and it can instantly kill you is just incredibly frustrating. And I ended up just sort of like having to build myself in a way where like a combination of just like generating healing, life leeching, and Netherwalk being able to turn invulnerable for a few seconds if like I needed to get the fuck out. That was how I ended up getting to the very bottom. I probably should have mentioned this at the very beginning, but like, I've beaten tier 10 Mephisto, which is not the highest you can go in a season, but it's like, it's as high as I'm willing to go. There's like nothing permanent left that I can get from the game in terms of like the season content, so that's a big reason why I put this out, is just like, I hit endgame, I slammed my face into it, and I had a great time. But I guess we'll talk about like the rest of the endgame stuff. So there are basically the big three headline features of Lord of Hatred is the war plan system, the Horadric Cube, and the sigils. We'll start with the sigils first because they're like the simplest thing to talk about. The sigils are basically their answer to the set piece problem that has pervaded Diablo for a long time, where set pieces either become the meta thing because they're so overpowered and overinflated that uniques just sort of become useless. Diablo 3 had this problem where because set pieces were so strong, they like would amplify the amount of damage abilities do by like thousands of %. It just became all that mattered. And then the item chase just sort of died. So what the Lord of Hatred opted to do instead was to give you these sigils and charms. The sigils are like the main centerpiece thing, and the charms are like the actual, like, they're like charms from Diablo 2, where instead of sitting in your inventory, you just slot them into these 6 pieces. Well, up to 6 pieces. For a long time, you're only going to have 4, and then for a long time after, you're gonna have 5. I didn't have, like, a 6th charm slot until I was, like, I think I was in, like, Torment 8, and there's evidently mythic seals that I never saw, but I'm fine with that. And I don't know how the class sets work for the other classes. I only played Warlock, but they also fall very much into archetypes. There's one that's made for, like, Abyss Warlocks, there's one that's about demons, and the one I ended up going with, which is the Nameless set, is the one that basically cranks all of the sigil damage and the sigil effects in a lot of, like, kind of numb, number crunchy ways. It's basically a lot of text that says, like, your sigil attacks have 200% more potency. And it's good, but it's just kind of, you know, it's boring, is a way to put it. But that is the purpose of the set pieces, is that it's just raw power, but it's offloaded onto this other menu instead of affecting your actual gear slots, which I do like. I think in order to solve that problem while still having sets, I think this works. What doesn't work with them is just the sheer flood of charms you get. Like, for most people, most of the charms that are going to drop are just going to be useless. Like, they just are. This isn't like, you know, there's not really a debate, because there's only going to be one set of charms that's going to be good for your build, and while there are, I think it's like 2, 3, and then 5-piece bonuses, I don't know about the other classes, but for Warlock, the bonuses are so segregated, there is no reason whatsoever to not just go for the 5-piece. So there's like... I think there's like 4 different sets, I forgot their names, but they're all helpfully like color-coded, like the ones I was using was purple, there's one that's red, there's one that I think is green, and I think there's like another one. But like, for all of them, they're just guff. But you're able to use the Horadric Cube to like recycle them, but the problem is that like, because there's so fucking many of them, it takes so long to process them to try and like find something useful out of them, because like, you can get movement speed, you can get resistances, you can get more of your core stats out of them. There's a lot, but there's also like, you know, guff things. There's like more money drops, more crafting materials drop, and things like that. No gems, unfortunately, but, you know, that's another thing. So I like the way the sigils work, I'm just not thrilled with the minutia that's needed to process them. Because I was very tempted to just be like, alright, I got my 5-piece, I don't need to care about shit. But then I got my 6th slot, and I was able to slot in the Enduring Faith unique into that. That's another thing that I think could be cool, but I don't know if they want to do it, because unless you have a special sigil, you can only have one unique sigil. It's specifically designed so that like 5 of your charms are going to be set charms, and then you'll be able to slot in like one unique charm in there. That's hard-coded. You can't have like 3 unique charms and then go for a 3-piece. You just can't do it without like a certain mythic seal. And I think what that's going to end up leading to is just like, yeah, most people are just going to put Enduring Faith in it because you need that in order to just not get one shot. Which is fine, but that's what we're looking at. So next I think we'll talk about the Horadric Cube. This shit is why you buy Lord of Hatred. I will be upfront. It's the best thing in the goddamn game. For anyone who doesn't know, the Horadric Cube was first made all the way back in Diablo 2, and it's this fun little transmutionary mystery box that, like, narratively you had to, like, make the Staff of Tal Rasha by putting, like, an amulet, a staff, and I think there was a 3rd piece, and then you would just transmute it. And you would do the same with, like, the Flail of Khalil or Khalid, I don't remember. But you could also, like, craft unique items out of it, you could fuse gems up into it, you could do all sorts of really cool stuff, but in Diablo 2, they didn't tell you shit. People just discovered it by experimenting with the cube and then posting it online, which is cool, but nowadays that's a little... that wouldn't really jive well today. But the cube does this right balance of like, it will give you a list of recipes of what you can do and what the ingredients need, but there's still some really cool mysteries about it. Like, for example, you can target what resistances you want to put on an item by putting in a sufficiently strong enough gem. So if you want fire resistance, when you go to like add like defensives, you would put in like you would put in a defensive prism along with the selected item and like whatever resource gets automatically pulled in, and then it would just put that on there. You can manicure really powerful stuff in it. It's dramatically changed how you would farm items, because originally for Diablo, the only thing you would be looking for is just items with greater affixes on it. The more GAs, which is like basically max rolled affixes that are, it's a whole thing. But basically like any little star that shows up next to an item name, that was what you were looking for. You weren't specifically looking for rarity at that point, because like once you're in the endgame, everything was just ancestral uniques. But thanks to this system, yellows and blues that have a greater affix are still high value, because there are some greater affixes. I don't know how many. I think it's only like resistance to all is like the only thing that's like the big ticket, you can't get this out of a cube, where it's like if you see an item with it, you're like, oh shit, I can make something with this. And it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of like little tricks that you can do. Like you can, if you do have an item with a greater affix, like let's just say for an example, you have an item on it that has like a greater affix fire damage multiplication, but you want to add more offensive things. Well, the problem is if you do, but you get an affix that you don't like and you want to re-roll that, you run the risk of hitting that greater affixed fire molt, and you risk losing it. So what you would instead do is take that to the occultist. You would lock it in by enchanting it, and instead of changing it, you would just keep it on that affix, and it would lock in, and then you could do what you want with it. And then after, obviously, you would go through the whole rigmarole of like putting all the affixes on it, getting it to like 4 affix, make it legendary, and if you don't like the legendary affix that rolled on it, you could change that to whatever you could in the codex. Then you could put sockets in it. Then you would masterwork it, which is just, you roll a 5th affix on it, or you implant a 5th affix, and then you sit there and you just high roll it to get it to be a greater affix. Then you masterwork it, and you manicure that into whatever stat you want boosted, whether it's fire, molt, resistance, whatever. And you build this perfect item, and then you've got the final thing, which is transfiguration or transmutation, which is basically just, if you've played Path of Exile, it's just throwing a Vol Orb at it and just gambling on it. And that's a lot of fun, especially because, and they do a really cool thing with, because you can, if you do it and you can't modify it anymore, it's like the final thing you do to it. And either you high roll and you get gem power, which since all gems and weapons now give elemental multipliers, can really crank that weapon into something insane. Or it can just change one of your greater affixes into something useless like thorns, and then you just brick the item. And I had thought that wouldn't be fun, but it just kind of is. Because once you're at the late game, and once you set your loot filter up, it isn't really that bad if you get an item and you brick it. Because you'll eventually find more. It may not be the perfect item, but even then, if you do quote unquote brick it, it's still usable. In fact, there's a prism you can get that will guarantee that you won't get one of the really bad outcomes, you won't brick it, but it will just instead only give you a middling outcome. So if it's one of your first big ticket items, you can still make it useful, which I think is great. The only issue I have with the cube itself is just, I don't know why, I suspect this is a coding issue. All the prisms and stuff that you need in order to manicure your items, for some reason they aren't auto pickup. But some of them are. There's these 2, I think there's 3 dust or powder resources that are always used in transmutations that are treated in-game as currencies. Those you always pick up, those are automatically picked up, but you don't pick up the prisms or the cultier, the Zoltan Cool cubes, or the thing that you need in order to actually do the transmutation. Those you always have to manually pick up, and it adds to this click bloat effect when it comes to doing late game activities and farming stuff. Because when you're doing not lair bosses because they only drop so much, but for example, let's say you're doing nightmare dungeons and you're farming Astaroth, who's the big pinnacle boss of that thing. He always just drops a metric fuck ton of shit. He'll drop up to 10, 20, 30 things at a time between him and his dog mount. And a significant amount of that item bloat are these prisms and cubes. And they're important, but they're not important enough to where you just gotta sit there and go, okay. Because I don't know about anyone else, but there's only so many items that will show on display when anything drops. So you have to sit there and just manually click shit that you're gonna pick up anyway. They're like gems, basically, but the problem is that I understand because it works similar to the Nightmare Dungeon keys. I understand if there was a fear that, well, you're gonna be able to overfill your inventory, so because of that, we can't just have them auto pick up. But that isn't true, because the tab that holds all of the Horadric Cube essences and whatnot, there's still 10 slots left in there. It's still empty. So unless they're intending to add 15 more reagents, it may as well just auto pick up all the fucking cubes and prisms and shit. Because you're not going to do it unless you're so flush with resources that you just don't bother. At that point, it's just, it would just help with like reducing like repetitive stress injuries, I guess. That's like my only real problem with the cube. Otherwise, I fucking love it. I think it's the best feature they've added in the game. The other end game thing that they did add though was the war plan system. And I'm a little mixed on this. So the war plan system is basically two things at once. The first is you are given this you're randomly generated a table of activities, and they're all set up in a tree going from top to bottom. And every node on the tree is an activity that will give you experience towards that activity. So if, for example, if you do Nightmare Dungeons, you get experience toward a Nightmare Dungeon tree that's off to the side that has a bunch of its own nodes that you can tweak and juice in order to increase the difficulty but also increase the rewards. But all of these nodes also have little inducements on it. So some will give you extra experience, some will give you more crafting resources, some will just drop more jewelry and armor. But they don't do that during the activity itself. They are given to you once you do all 5 and you come back to the table and there's a chest where they all just pop out and just flood on the ground. I like the war plans in theory, but the problem is that how it's structured doesn't mesh well with all of the activities. Because there's 6 activities, technically 7 with the Whispering Trees, but 3 of them, Hell Tides, Nightmare Dungeons, and oh god, there's one more that's like this. I was thinking Infernal Hordes, but I guess not really, but it's primarily Hell Tides and Nightmare Dungeons. They're not really set up to be conducive with this whole do a quick thing and then move on sort of thing, right? Because Hell Tides, it considers it done. Every node is considered just go to the Hell Tide and open 2 chests and then you can move on. Nightmare Dungeons are the same thing where it's just clear out 1 dungeon, then just move on. The problem is when you really want to get deep into both of those activities, you really don't want to just do 2 things and then move on. Hell Tides, you want to sit there and just farm a bunch of cinders from enemies and then open, every chest you can. It's not really meant to be a thing where you just quickly do it because they're time limited. They last roughly 50 minutes and then they are off for 5 or so every now and then. Nightmare Dungeons are kind of similar, at least with the escalation dungeons, where instead of doing just 1 dungeon, you do 3, and then you fight Astaroth. Every single one of those 3 counts as a node on the tree, which means if you want to do an escalation dungeon, you really want to try and get at least 3 nodes on the tree that are Nightmare Dungeons in a row. Unfortunately, while you can re-roll the tree up to 3 times per run through of it, you can't re-roll the nodes, and I've had it happen to where I get 3 of the same activity in the row, but it's rare. And I've had it happen where I've gotten 4, which is perfect for Hell Tides and Nightmare Dungeons, but that is also rare. And usually when that happens, you have to give up all of the other inducements. And it just feels... I really wish I could re-roll individual nodes, or at least unlock an ability to do that, to be okay, I just want to do Hell Tides, and I'll just make it so that even if I don't get any of these other inducements, I can just power through it and focus on this. Because the tree this isn't like Path of Exile where you I'm going to do Breach, I'm going to do Abyss, and nothing else for the entire season. It's not designed like that. It wants you to bounce around all the different activities, and it's, with a few exceptions, it's generally structured that way where you do want to. You want to do lair bosses because most of your class's uniques are going to be there. And if you want to go for experience, you want to do Hell Tides because the Duriel node where the maggots will just flood you with it. Every activity has a reason and a purpose for doing it, although some have better reasons and purposes than others. For example, the Infernal Hordes, I needed to do Infernal Hordes in order to get my necklace, the Hemet Stone, because it juices up my demons' buff powers and everything, but I personally just am not a big fan of Infernal Hordes because I'm tired of choose 3 roguelikes, and that's what that mode is. but it also just takes forever, and like the rewards from it aren't that great in compared to the other modes. And while there are attempts to like, how do I put this? There are different ways where they sort of cross-pollinate with each other. So for example, you can, in the lair tree, get a node that will cause Belial to spawn at the end of Infernal Hordes, which is cool if you're trying to farm him in order to, like, I guess farm, like, his boss fight. But, like, at that point, why not just do lair bosses over and over again? Which leads into my other problem with it, is that sometimes I just want to farm a single thing, and not all of them are set up right. Like, gems have this weird problem right now, where the best way to get them is to farm Seer's Rest, which is just this random new dungeon where the boss will drop 3 of them. And it's actually kind of a fucking problem, because the higher tier gems, like the really high ones, the Horadric gems, require something like 5 million gem fragments in total to get one. Like, it's insane. I don't have any of them. The closest I've gotten is I've got like 4... They're not royal. They're like, I've got 5 like skulls that are just below that. So I've got like effectively 4 million skull fragments, but I'm not anywhere close to getting them. Some of the trees are also just unfortunately not as interesting as other trees are. Like, for example, I think the best trees in terms of how it's set up is probably the Helltide tree and the Lair tree, but for very different reasons. The Helltide tree is really good because it's basically broken up into like 3 wings, although there's like 3 going down the middle, where let's say you really want to devote Helltides to farming experience. Well, that's what the Duriel maggots are there for. If you really want to farm like general uniques there, you can set that up too. But that's not all of them. There's like the lair boss tree is good because like if you really want to farm a single lair boss, like for example, you really need something from the Beast and Ice, you can have him come in nightmare dungeons while you're fighting bosses, and if you succeed while he's invading, you will get like some extra bites at his apple to where he'll drop a couple of extra uniques that might help you out with them. But then you run into ones that like defeat the purpose of what the activity itself is. The pit, for example, is probably the one where I'm like, what are we doing here? Because the tree is basically broken down into 3 lanes. There is the left one that's designed to help you complete the pit faster. Like you have like little treasure goblins that will drop progression orbs, will start spawning in there. You'll be able to carry like a stone on you that will cause random enemies to occasionally drop progression orbs, etc., etc. But then the other side is about like getting more loot to drop from the pit, but you're not going into the pit to farm loot. So why would you ever do that? You see what I mean? And you might say, well, isn't that a nice benefit? But it's like, not really. Because you're always going to get levels for your glyphs, which is a whole other progression thing. So why would I invest in this little side benefit when I can just get the thing that gets me what I want faster? You see this a lot in nightmare dungeons too, where it's like, the purpose of going into a nightmare dungeon is to get loot. That's what it's for. They tend to drop the most loot on average, especially escalation dungeons. So you can either go down the tree that gives you a lot more like loot potential drops. Like one of my favorite ones is if you pop a shrine, it will spawn a bunch of like rares and like dangerous mobs right next to you, up to 7 of them. And then later on in the tree, you'll get this thing where like all the rares you kill while you have a shrine buff, they basically get stored into you, and then once the buff expires, they all spawn on top of you, so you get to have another bite at the apple. And they both combo really well. And it's like, why would I ever take anything that isn't like this? Although, to be fair, on the other end of that tree is another really powerful effect where like, when you're doing an escalation dungeon, instead of just getting like 1 portal and that's it, you can choose between 3 of them. That tree is pretty well manicured, but by and large, most of them aren't. They have like a very obvious, this is the thing I want for this activity because it's either what the activity is for, or in the example of lair bosses, I need something specifically from this one boss why wouldn't I invest in this to help increase my odds of getting it? Even if I would probably just be farming that singular boss anyway, instead of like trying to get bites at it while I'm doing something else. Speaking of lair bosses though, there is one thing that's unique to that tree that I think is very fun, although I think as of right now it's currently bugged or they changed how it works into a way I'm not a big fan of. Basically, whenever you kill a lair boss and you open their chest, you have a chance of a portal to spawn in their room. If you go in, you then go into an area where you have to fight 2 of them at the same time. So you could be fighting Lord Zir and Gregor, or basically any number of combination of the lesser bosses at the same time, which is pretty spooky. But if you succeed, you get a massive treasure haul from both of them. But if you also, after succeeding that, have a chance for another portal to spawn, in which you'll fight 2 greater bosses. You could fight Andariel and Duriel, or the Harbinger and Belial. It's a number of combinations as well. And they all have their full mechanics right there in that room, so you might have to deal with Duriel burrowing under the ground with his maggot minions, while also having Andariel's like spinning laser in the middle of the room. And if you have like a lot of, I don't even know if it's luck for this final one, because both times I got the greater portal, I ended up like seeing this thing. You can exchange like 5 tokens from Belial, which is like the end game of the lair bosses, where you would spend 2 in order to get a bite at his chest. But if you spend 5 of the tokens, you get to go into this ultimate boss fight. Now, I don't know if it's the same every time because I only did it once, but I had to fight both Andariel and Duriel and Azmodan, the world boss, at the same time in one room. That thing was nuts. It was wild, having to deal with all of their full mechanics and just dealing with Azmodan's big fat ass just taking up space in the middle of the room. That thing took me like 10 minutes. That was probably one of my favorite fights throughout the entire season journey. And I got flooded with treasure. It was glorious. I ended up getting 2-3 greater affix versions of the gloves I needed in order to complete my build just from that fight. God, that thing was peak. I wish I gotten footage of it, because I don't know if like you go in, it's always that trio, or you have to deal with a different world boss or different greater bosses. That shit was great. I know this has been rambly and I'm sorry, but I'm gonna wrap up with one final thing, which is the current pinnacle fight of the game right now. Although maybe not pinnacle, because like I said, I beat the tier 10 Mephisto at tier 10, although you can fight him at tier 12, but my understanding is that he gets harder, but there's no like benefit for doing it at tier 12, so I only did it at 10. That fight is both really good and really frustrating, and it's endemic to a lot of the problems that are key in Diablo 4 as a whole. Because that fight heavily relies on one-shotting people, but only not in like all the ways that you're thinking of. For example, I'm not gonna go through the whole thing because it's the story boss, and even though I basically went through most of the story, but like, it's 3 pretty challenging phases, although once you master like phase 1, it becomes nothing, then phase 2, it also becomes relatively nothing, and then phase 3 is a bit easier. The hard point is phase 2, but the answer ends up just being not to outskill it, it's just killing him faster. And I think that's fine, but it ended up feeling kind of unsatisfactory when I spent days trying to get through phase 1 and 2, and I was like, fuck this shit, I can't do it. And then I left it, and I just grinded better gear, and then the day afterward, I blitzed through phases 1 and 2, I died to phase 3 because I got caught by one of his hand waves, and then the attempt afterward, I just got it. I don't have a problem with him being hard. I actually really like that he's hard. My problem is that other than just doing it for the season, there's no unique reward for killing him. Like, you might have a chance at a mythic unique, but there are a lot of other better sources to farm them. he's mostly just there as like the final lock for the last tier of season rewards. I would really like it if, similar to PoE, if there were a set of uniques that were unique to Mephisto. I think that would be a good incentive to do it, and it would also give you something to like aspire to. Because as it is right now, if your only goal is to get all of the main season rewards, he's the final hurdle. Unless you're like willing to just grind the tower endlessly, which I don't really have an interest in, to be honest, but they just really need to deal with the hard cutscenes that are in between each phase, because it's for phase 1 to phase 2 it's not that bad, but phase 2 to phase 3 it's real bad. I think it's something like a minute and a half total between killing him in phase 2, him flooding the room with darkness, and then waiting for him to wake up and then spawn you into the final environment. I don't know how, and there are people that are speculating that that's that way to hide loading, which I buy. I do, but I think that's probably a problem to deal with. And the other is just the fact that, like, the sheer amount of one-shots he can do is a little frustrating. I ended up having to, like, use Enduring Faith to tank it and just sort of, like, whenever I got hit, I would try to shunt off as much damage as I could by nether walking, but I imagine for anyone who can't do that, it's incredibly frustrating to just get caught in one of his overlaps in phase 2 where it's like, well, I can't go anywhere because he's transitioned into like phase 2.2 and there's like shadow lines all coming from the north, and he's doing his big cold ray where he spins around the room while also still having blood bolts that he had casted earlier on, and it's just like, fuck. It's just a lot of visual noise that's hard to keep track of. Now granted, because I was playing Warlock and my screen was flooded with burns and runes, who knows? That might have just been a me thing. Overall, I would say that Lord of Hatred is probably the best that Diablo 4 has been. And my big issues are just the stuff that's like been problems with Diablo 4 since the beginning. The inventory management is a little guff. There's like, the Tree of Whispers is probably another one that I didn't bring up that's like, it's been 3 fucking years. Why the fuck do we have it set to once we have like 10 of the, like 10, we fill the meter to 10 plus, you just hard lock people from getting any more? It's a real pace breaker. And I think that's like the other big problem is just like the pace breakers between like the Obel's cap where you can only have 2,500 of them, the pace breaker that comes where it's like, I want to do this longer activity, but because of the war plans and not being able to get that much like war plan EXP unless I'm strictly following like what the tree route is, like optimally if you were to grind that you just wouldn't do anything longer like Hell Tides or Escalations. That to me feels bad, and I would suggest being able to either re-roll individual nodes to like set up individual streaks, or I don't know, fixing maybe just like... The other thing too is just I wish the cube was expanding. I'm mumbling a lot because it's been over an hour. We need to be able to fuse escalation dungeon keys. It's really weird that you can fuse 5 regular dungeon keys into an escalation key, but you can't fuse 5 escalation keys into an ancestral escalation key. Like, I've got a stash tab full of escalation keys, because by late game you just get flooded with them. And granted, I was farming Astaroth like crazy in order to get loot drops, so that's probably on me, but it feels a little weird that like you just get flooded with these escalation keys and you're just not incentivized. There's like mixed incentives from doing all of them and just like trying to just get like little bite size for the war plan. But overall, I would say Diablo 4 is the best it's been, and I am sorry if this has been rambly as shit. I wanted to try and do a more off-the-cuff thoughts sort of video just because, like, it's fun doing the whole very scripted thing, but I thought an experiment would fit. And I'm sure this isn't exactly cohesive, but there we go. Thank you for listening. Overall, yeah, I think Blizzard mostly has hit it out of the park, which is good. They just gotta fix all the bugs and shit. Also, don't have the fucking nightmare portals, or don't have, like, the lair boss portals only last 30 seconds if you're gonna drop, like, 30 plus items for people to sift through. What the fuck? I think I read that that was done that way because people were exploiting it, but, like, what the fuck? No, don't do that. I don't care how, like, you gotta find some way to cut down on the fucking loot bloat a little bit. And while the loot filters help with that, yeah. Anyway, thank you for listening to this audible ramble vomit. Have a good day.